Hello and welcome to the second of our mini Latin lessons. For this lesson we will look in some more detail at verbs, conjugations and tenses, a topic that we will continue and conclude in the third mini lesson. As in the first lesson, I would encourage you to take out the Lesson 2 worksheet and to read the introductory remarks alongside this video. In our first lesson, we've already seen that Latin verbs, just like Latin nouns, are formed by inflection. They change their endings in a process that we called conjugation. There is a variety of different categories of meaning that verbal endings encode, and we've already met the first three of these categories: person, number, and tense, when we looked at the conjugation paradigm of the verb amo, I love, in our first video. Remember, the category person answers to the question who acts, and the category number to the question of how many act. So all Latin verbs distinguish in their endings between the first person singular, I, the second person singular, you, the third person singular, he, she, it, the first person plural, we, the second person plural, you plural, and the third person plural, they. We've also already heard about tense as the verbal category describing when the action takes place, and we've seen the present tense conjugation of amo. Latin distinguishes between a variety of other tenses as well, for both past and future, and we will meet the imperfect, one of the most frequent Latin past tenses, in our third mini lesson. Thinking about the category of tense, we may note once again that the generally uninflected English language also has the occasional instance of inflection, a remnant of an older, much more inflected system of the language. The English simple past, I loved, so the ed form, marks the past tense through an inflectional ending, even if it does not, of course, at the same time mark this form for other categories, such as person or number. Latin verbal inflection carries even more information than that. Latin verbal endings are also marked for what is called voice, that is, for whether a verb is active or passive. So where English needs several different words to distinguish active, I love, from passive, I am loved, Latin only has to use a single verb form in each case with the respective active or passive ending. And so we get amo, I love, in the active, but amor, I am loved, in the passive. Finally, Latin verbs are marked by inflection for a category called mood, which expresses the speaker's attitude towards what they are saying. Is what they're saying perceived as a fact, as a desire, or as a command? And a well-known subcategory of mood is the subjunctive, which you may well know from learning other languages such as German or French. So what are conjugations in detail? Just as there are different declensions that describe the specific inflection patterns of specific nouns, and we've already met the first, the second and the third declension in our first lesson, there are different conjugations that describe the inflection patterns of specific kinds of verbs. In Latin, there are 4 different conjugations, which are distinguished by the different stems they take, or more specifically, by the vowel in which the stem ends. And remember, the stem is the uninflected, unchangeable part of a word. We will see these conjugations and stem patterns in action in a minute when we look at a conjugation table of the present tense. Before we do that, however, we need to briefly think about the tense as such. Little surprisingly, verbs in the present tense describe actions that take place in the present, that is, now. Contrary to English, however, Latin does not distinguish between a continuous and a simple form of the present tense. So while English differentiates between the continuous I am running, as in I'm running now, and the simple, or we might say habitual, I run, as in I run every Wednesday afternoon, Latin only uses one form, in this case, corro, I run or I'm running. Only the context tells us whether we need to opt for one or the other, not the verb form. Here, and on page 2 of the Lesson 2 worksheet, is an overview of the present active paradigm of all 4 conjugations. As you can see, stems of first conjugation verbs like amo, I love, end in a. Only in the first person singular is the a omitted before o. So we get the pattern we've already seen in our first lesson: amo, amas, amat, amamos, amates, amat. Or in English, I love, you love, he, she, it loves, we love, you plural love, they love, or again, they are loving, they are in love. As you can see in the next column, in habeo, I have, stems of the second conjugation and in a long e, and this is the Latin pronunciation of the vowel e. This vowel they carry throughout, so we get habeo, habes, habet, habemos, habetes, habent, or again in English, I have, you have, he, she, it has, we have, you plural have, they have, or again, they are having, and so on and so forth. The third conjugation is a tiny bit more tricky. As you can see with mito, I send, third conjugation stems look a bit different. They actually end in a short but this is often omitted or replaced before the verbal endings. So this actually never really shows up in the present conjugation table that we can see here. Instead, the stem final vowel changes 3 times. It is omitted before the first person singular or and replaced by a short e in all other persons and numbers apart from the third person plural where we get u. Luckily, the verbal endings, however, are very regular, and so I've left them for you to complete in worksheet 2. The fourth conjugation is again very regular. As in dormio, I sleep, it shows a long e at the end of each stem. And e is the Latin pronunciation of the English vowel I. Again, the missing forms on the worksheet should be quite easy for you to supply. This is really all you need to know for a first introduction to Latin verbs, conjugations, and the present tense, and of course, in order to approach the exercises on the second worksheet. But to give you a bit of a head start, I will conclude the video with a sample exercise that is very similar to the ones you need to do for exercise C on the second worksheet. Let's try to complete and translate the following Latin sentence. Pueri am gap puellas. What we have here are 2 noun forms, pueri and puellas, and 1 verbal form, am, that we need to complete. We can guess straight away that needs to be a form of the verb amo, which we already know quite well, but in order to figure out which form of amo we need, we have to take a closer look at the 2 nouns. Puellas should look relatively familiar. In our first lesson, we have had an encounter with first declension nouns, and puella was our paradigm word. Puella meaning girl, and we learned that the ending as marks the accusative plural. So puellas, the girls or girls, is going to be the object of our sentence. Since there's no cheating in these introductory Latin lessons, by all means have a look at your worksheet 1 now to check up on the forms of puella. If puellas is the object, we may suspect that pueri is the subject of our sentence, and indeed the ending e, here again meaning the Latin pronunciation of the English I, is an ending that we've seen for second declension nouns in the nominative plural. Remember the form amici. If I now give you the additional information that the second declension noun pur means boy, pueri in the nominative plural must mean boys or the boys. So we can now come up with a translation of our sentence. The boys love the girls, or boys love girls. Sadly, a somewhat stereotypical sentence here. This tells us all we need to know to figure out the correct form of amo. The boys requires a third person plural verb, and so what we need is the form amant. And the Latin sentence thus reads, pueri amant puellas. In exactly the same way, you can now tackle exercise C and of course the other exercises before it.